Hi everyone, my name is Caden Proulx, and today I'll be talking about ADHD, which refers to the co-occurrence of autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. These two neurodevelopmental conditions frequently appear together, and when they do, they create a unique profile of challenges and other things that is different from how either condition presents on its own. ADHD is not an official diagnostic label, but it's a widely used term in clinical and neurodivergent communities to describe individuals who meet the criteria for both autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, both ASD and ADHD affect areas like social communication, sensory processing, attention, and behavior regulation. When these conditions overlap, the effects can compound and cause more serious adverse effects. For example, someone might experience sensory overwhelm from ASD while also struggling with impulsivity from ADHD, or they may have difficulty reading social cues while also having trouble sustaining attention in conversations. These overlapping traits can make daily functioning more complex, especially when presenting in childhood. Research shows that ASD and ADHD co-occur at very high rates. A major study by Zablotsky found that about 1 in 3 children diagnosed with ADHD also meet the criteria for autism. This is a significant number, and it highlights how important it is for clinicians to screen both conditions rather than assuming a child only has one. The DSM, published in 2013, was the first edition to allow clinicians to diagnose ASD and ADHD together for the same person. Before that, a child could only receive one diagnosis, which meant many kids were misunderstood or misdiagnosed. Since that change, the rates of co-occurring diagnoses have steadily increased, not because the conditions are suddenly more common, but because conditions are finally allowed to recognize how they affect people together. Zablotsky also found that children with both ASD and ADHD were significantly more likely to have additional co-occurring conditions such as anxiety disorders, behavioral challenges, or learning disabilities compared to children who had only ADHD or only ASD. When ASD and ADHD overlap, the signs and symptoms can be wide-ranging. Based on the CDC and NIH, some of the most common symptoms include difficulty starting or finishing tasks, trouble following conversations or staying focused, fidgeting or difficulty sitting still, communication and interaction challenges, rigid routines or repetitive behaviors, too little or too intense of eye contact. And what's important to remember is that these symptoms don't simply add up together, they interact with each other. For example, a child might hyperfocus intensely on a special interest because of ADHD, but the topic itself may be tied to autistic restricted interests. Or a child may struggle with transitions because of ASD while also being impulsive because of ADHD. This combination can make school, social situations, and daily routines a lot more challenging. The prevalence numbers help us understand how widespread ADHD actually is. As I mentioned earlier, 1 in 3 children with ADHD also have ASD, according to the Zablotsky article. We also know that 93.7% of children with ADHD require in-school support, and 70% need support at home. These numbers show how important early identification and intervention truly are and how much of a difference it can make in the child's life. Even though ADHD is common, it is still not formally recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. That means families often have to navigate two separate diagnostic systems, two sets of interventions, sometimes conflicting recommendations from multiple different providers. When it comes to causes, the research is clearer for ADHD than it is for autism so far. According to the NIH, autism is believed to involve over 100 genes across multiple chromosomes, but there is no single known cause. It's a complex interaction of genetics and environment. ADHD, on the other hand, is strongly hereditary. The National Institute for Mental Health notes that ADHD often runs in families, and environmental factors such as prenatal exposure and post early childhood and infancy exposures can influence symptom severity. When both conditions appear together, it's likely due to overlapping genetic pathways. Studies like Girardi show strong familial co-aggregation, meaning ASD and ADHD tend to cluster within the same families. Diagnosing ADHD can be complicated because symptoms can overlap and can mask each other. ASD is typically diagnosed based on persistent challenges in social communication, at least two types of repetitive or restricted behaviors, and this comes from the Autism Society and the National Institute for Health. Clinicians also use tools like the ADOS-2, which involves structured observation and interaction. ADHD is diagnosed based on patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity that interfere with functioning. Because the two conditions interact, a child might appear inattentive due to sensory overload, or they might seem socially withdrawn because they're overwhelmed by impulsivity. This is why comprehensive evaluation is so important, because it can make the difference between understanding why this is happening and confusing it for something else. Here are some family resources for families, clinicians, and educators.